The morning sun filtered through soft linen curtains, casting golden streaks across the wooden floor of the nursery in progress. Ivy stood barefoot in the doorway, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the crib they had assembled just the night before. A smile crept across her face, not just at the sight of the unfinished room, but at the life that was about to arrive. Their baby, their son. The walls were still blank, just drywall and dust, but in her mind she saw them blooming with color. Murals, decals, soft blue skies above a field of animals or stars or dreams. She sighed, imagining laughter filling this space. Behind her, a deep voice broke the silence. "Thinking about your masterpiece again?" She turned to see Isaac, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his tall frame leaning against the doorframe, shirt half buttoned. "I was just picturing it finished," she said, still smiling. "I'm leaning toward mint green, or maybe a warm yellow." Isaac's face crinkled slightly, not in a smile, but the kind of polite disagreement she knew too well. "Yellow?" he asked, walking into the room. "Isn't that a bit loud? I thought we agreed on a soft gray or powder blue, calming, neutral." Ivy's brows furrowed, ever so subtly. "Gray feels cold to me. This room should feel like sunlight, like hope. He'll be born into this world with so much to face already. I want these walls to promise him joy." Isaac folded his arms across his chest, staring at the empty canvas of a wall. "Joy doesn't have to be painted on the walls, Ivy. We need something practical, something peaceful. Bright colors overstimulate babies." The air between them shifted, not sharp, but dense, like the first cloud on a clear sky. "You think yellow is overstimulating?" Ivy repeated slowly, a hint of tension in her voice. "But not gray? You want the room to be calming, but at what cost? To feel like a waiting room?" Isaac turned to her then, his eyes not angry, but searching. "It's not about a color war. I just don't want everything to be a debate lately. It feels like we're on different wavelengths all the time." Ivy's shoulders dropped. She exhaled, not in defeat, but in restraint. "I don't want us fighting over walls, but we can't keep brushing over things, Isaac. This baby's room, it's not just a design choice. It's symbolic. It matters." They stood there in silence. Two people in love, but with a quiet storm brewing just beneath the surface. After a moment, Isaac nodded slowly. "Fine, yellow, but at least let me pick the rug." A smile flickered on Ivy's lips. "Deal." But as she leaned into his arms and felt his heartbeat against hers, she couldn't shake the sense that something deeper, unspoken and unresolved, was already cracking the surface of their carefully curated life. It had been one of those autumn days that felt both alive and heavy, where golden leaves spiraled through the air like whispers, and the sky teetered on the edge of a storm. Ivy had been running breathless and late across the sprawling campus of Eastbridge University, her umbrella flailing in the wind and a folder of handwritten notes pressed desperately against her chest. The rain came fast, a sudden downpour that soaked through her coat and flattened her curls in seconds. She cursed under her breath as her foot slipped on a slick stone path. Her books flew from her hands, scattering across the walkway like fallen feathers. Then, a hand, large, warm, steady. "Whoa, hey, easy there," came a voice, smooth and concerned. She looked up, blinking through raindrops, into a pair of dark brown eyes full of quiet humor. A stranger in a drenched hoodie knelt beside her, offering his hand like they were old friends. His skin glistened with rain, and he was already gathering her papers with careful hands. I'm okay," she mumbled, mortified. "Just clumsy." "Good thing I was here to catch the clumsy girl," he said, flashing a disarming smile. "Name's Isaac." "Ivy." He stood, holding out the last of her notes. "Well, Ivy, allow me to escort you to shelter. You look like you're seconds away from dissolving." She laughed. A real laugh. The first one that day. "I wouldn't mind disappearing right now, to be honest." They dashed beneath the stone archway of the literature building, both breathless, wet, and strangely comfortable. From that moment, something unspoken stirred between them. Over the weeks that followed, Isaac made a habit of being everywhere Ivy happened to be. He brought her coffee on cold mornings with embarrassing notes scrawled on napkins. "Here's caffeine and poor handwriting. Hope your day improves from here. He waited outside her classes just to walk her to the library, even when it meant carrying her heavy bag like it weighed nothing. Ivy had been guarded. She'd seen charming men before, the kind who flirted freely and vanished quickly. But Isaac wasn't like that. He asked about her family, her childhood, her dreams, and he listened. "I always wanted to be a writer," she told him one night as they walked under lamplight, rust-colored leaves crunching beneath their feet. "But people like me, we don't always get to tell our stories." Isaac had stopped, taken her hand, and said, "Then I'll make sure the world hears yours." It was one of the few times Ivy didn't have a reply. They came from different worlds. Ivy was the daughter of a single black mother who worked 2 jobs to put her through school. Isaac was from a long line of professionals, lawyers, professors, with expectations stitched into every conversation. His family didn't say the word privilege, but it clung to them like expensive cologne. Still, Isaac never once made Ivy feel small. He never tried to fix her past or downplay her resilience. Instead, he marveled at it, like it made her more, not less. When he introduced her to his family, she felt the tight smiles, the measured politeness. She heard the questions disguised as compliments, but Isaac never flinched. He held her hand tighter. He stood taller. He made space for her where there wasn't any. And in return, Ivy gave him what he never knew he needed: truth, depth, a sense that love wasn't just admiration, but endurance. 2 years later, under the same tree where he first kissed her, Isaac knelt in the mud and held out a modest ring with shaking fingers. "Ivy, you are the fiercest, gentlest, most impossible woman I've ever known," he said. "Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't need to think. "Yes." The hospital room buzzed with low fluorescent light and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Outside, snow fell in hushed spirals against the dark windows. Inside, Ivy gripped Isaac's hand with knuckles turned white, her body racked with another contraction that shook the bed. "You're doing great, Ivy," the nurse said calmly. "Just one more push." Isaac leaned closer, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "You're almost there, love. I've got you." Ivy was beyond words now, sweat pouring down her temples, pain crashing over her in violent waves. She had never imagined childbirth could feel like this. Raw, primal, both terrifying and beautiful. With one final shuddering effort, she cried out and bore down. A moment later, a sharp wail filled the room. Their son had arrived. The nurse moved swiftly, lifting the newborn and cradling him in practiced arms. She wiped him gently, then paused. Her expression flickered, the kind of flicker that lasts only a second but says everything. Isaac noticed it first. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Is everything okay?" The nurse hesitated. "He's healthy, strong lungs, a beautiful baby boy." She wrapped him in a soft blanket but didn't immediately place him on Ivy's chest. "Let me see him," Ivy panted, exhausted but radiant. "Let me hold my son." The nurse handed him over, and Ivy's smile froze mid-formation. The baby's skin was pale, unmistakably pale, with wisps of fine blonde hair. His eyes were a stormy gray blue. Nothing about him resembled Ivy, nor Isaac. She blinked, trying to understand. Surely newborns could look lighter, couldn't they? Isaac stared at the child in stunned silence. He didn't reach for him. He didn't smile. "How?" he whispered. "How is this possible?" Ivy looked up at him, confused and raw. "He's just light-skinned, maybe. Babies can look different when they're born. Haven't you heard that?" But Isaac stepped back slightly, his face tightening. No, Ivy. This doesn't make sense." "Isaac," her voice trembled. "What are you trying to say?" He didn't answer immediately. His jaw clenched, hands curling into fists. His eyes never left the baby. "Tell me the truth, Ivy." Her mouth dropped open, breath catching in her throat. "You think I—" She choked on the words. "You think I cheated on you?" A thick silence filled the room. The nurse, sensing the tension, quietly stepped out. "I don't know what to think right now," Isaac said, voice barely above a whisper but heavy with accusation. But that's not my son. He can't be. Tears welled in Ivy's eyes, blurring her vision. Isaac, listen to yourself. Genetics is complicated. There are recessive traits, mixed heritage, things we don't even know. You're really going to look at me, after everything, and say that? I'm looking at a child who doesn't look like either of us, he snapped. Tell me how I'm supposed to explain that. Ivy clutched the baby to her chest protectively, her body still aching from labor, her heart now aching even more. I have never betrayed you. I loved you. I still do. But Isaac wasn't hearing her anymore. His mind had already begun closing the door, his thoughts spiraling into distrust and disbelief. I need air, he muttered, backing toward the door. Don't walk away from me, Ivy pleaded. Not now. Not like this. But he was already gone, leaving Ivy alone in the sterile white room, holding a newborn wrapped in innocence and confusion, wondering how something so beautiful could cause everything to break so quickly. She looked down at her son, tears spilling onto his blanket. I love you, she whispered, voice cracking. No matter what anyone says, I love you. But even as she spoke those words, a cold fear gripped her chest. Not about her child, but about the man who had just walked out the door, and what that absence might mean for the life they'd imagined. The house felt colder than it had before. It had only been 2 days since they left the hospital, but Ivy could already sense something in the walls, a quiet hostility, a silence that pressed on her chest. The nursery she had once poured her dreams into now stood untouched. The soft yellow paint looked duller, almost mocking. Isaac barely spoke. He slept on the far edge of the bed, back turned to her, pretending to be asleep when the baby cried in the middle of the night. Ivy tended to their son alone, feeding, rocking, whispering lullabies through tears she refused to let fall until she was in the dark. She had named him Elijah, a name that meant, "My God is Yahweh," a name she had chosen with hope. Now it was the only thing in her life that still felt real. It was on the 3rd day that the silence finally snapped. Isaac came home late. Ivy sat in the living room, Elijah asleep in her arms, a blanket swaddled tightly around him. He entered without a word, walked past her, and went straight to the kitchen. The slam of a cabinet echoed louder than any shout. I made dinner, she said quietly. He didn't answer. You haven't held him, she added. Not once since we got home. That stopped him. Isaac turned slowly, leaning against the counter with folded arms and a face carved in stone. Because every time I look at him, I see a lie. Ivy flinched. He's your son, Isaac. Don't, he snapped. Don't say that like it's a fact. You know what he looks like. I'm not crazy. She stood, carefully setting Elijah in his bassinet nearby. And what do you think he looks like, huh? What conclusion have you already written in your mind, judge and jury? Isaac didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words landed like hammers. I think, he said coldly, you've been hiding something, or someone. Ivy felt her heart pound against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. You think I cheated? I think I can't explain how 2 black parents have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child, he said. And I think I deserve an explanation. You deserve trust, she cried. We've built our entire life on that, Isaac. Don't tear it down because our baby doesn't fit into your neat little box. He ran his hands through his hair, pacing like a man coming undone. My parents already asked questions. You think they didn't notice? You think I don't hear them whispering? You think it doesn't eat me alive, wondering if I've been made a fool of? Ivy stepped closer, her voice cracking. I have never been with anyone else. Never. I don't know why Elijah looks the way he does, but I swear to you, I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. Isaac looked at her, long and hard, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and suspicion. I want a paternity test. The room fell silent. Ivy could hear the soft inhale and exhale of Elijah's tiny breath from the bassinet, fragile, pure, unaware. Her face twisted in disbelief. You want to test your own child? I want the truth. She shook her head slowly, stunned. No, you don't. You want proof I didn't betray you, because somewhere deep inside you already believe I did. And with that, she turned away from him, walked to the bassinet, and scooped Elijah back into her arms. As she rocked him gently, her back still to Isaac, Her voice was barely a whisper. "If you walk away from us now, Isaac, I don't know if there'll be a way back." But he didn't answer. The silence returned, this time heavier, like a door slowly closing. The morning he asked her to pack a bag, Ivy didn't argue. She hadn't slept. Neither had Isaac. The space between them in the bed had turned into something colder than distance. It had become a verdict. Silent, heavy, unyielding. He had spoken just once that morning, standing at the edge of the hallway with his keys in hand and his expression unreadable. "I think we need space," he said. "I know a place. Just for a few days. Quiet, secluded. Somewhere we can think." Ivy had looked up from where she rocked Elijah. Her eyes were puffy, her spirit frayed, but somewhere in her heart she wanted to believe him. Maybe they needed space. Maybe time would heal this. So she packed. Diapers, formula, extra onesies, a blanket her mother had crocheted. And when they left, she didn't realize she was walking into the last chapter of a life she thought she understood. The drive was long and winding. Winter trees blurred past the window, bare branches scraping the sky like claws. Elijah fussed in his car seat, and Ivy gently sang to soothe him. Isaac said nothing. They passed the last sign of civilization 30 minutes ago. No gas stations, no farms, not even a mailbox. Just empty road and pine forest swallowing the world on either side. Eventually, Isaac turned off the main road onto a narrow, gravel path. It wound deeper into the trees until the car came to a sudden stop in a clearing. Ivy glanced around. "Where are we?" He didn't answer. "I said, I need to grab something from the trunk," he interrupted, eyes locked forward. "Stay in the car." But something in his tone, flat, almost vacant, tightened her gut with dread. He stepped out and closed the door harder than necessary. Ivy waited, watching his silhouette move toward the back of the car. Seconds passed, then minutes. Elijah began to cry. She rocked the car seat gently, anxiety thickening with each moment of silence. Then she heard it, not footsteps returning, but the faint growl of another engine. Her heart stopped. She flung open the door, clutching Elijah to her chest, and ran around the side of the car. "Isaac," she called, panicked. "What's going on?" In the distance, through the lattice of trees, she saw his figure. He was getting into another vehicle, an old silver SUV, engine already running, headlights cutting through the branches like accusation. "Isaac!" she screamed. "What are you doing?" He didn't look back. "Wait! Please, don't leave us!" Elijah screamed now, echoing her terror. But Isaac slammed the door shut and drove off. The sound of tires crunching over gravel faded into silence. Gone. For a moment, Ivy just stood there, her lungs frozen, legs trembling. The wind bit at her face. Elijah cried louder. Then she collapsed to her knees. Her scream tore through the woods, raw, guttural, a sound pulled from the core of a soul unraveling. He had left them, not metaphorically, not in anger, literally. He brought her to the middle of nowhere and walked out of her life. "Why?" she sobbed, rocking back and forth. Elijah held tightly in her arms. "How could you?" But only the trees answered. Only the wind replied. She sat in the dirt, cradling her son, until her legs went numb, until Elijah's cries faded into quiet exhaustion. She looked around. Nothing but trees. No cell service, no road signs, no paths, just wilderness. She took one trembling breath, then another. "I'm not going to die here," she whispered. "You won't grow up in fear. I swear to you, Elijah, I will get us out of this." With tears drying on her cheeks and fire kindling behind her eyes, she stood. One arm held her child. The other wiped her face. She didn't know where she was, but she knew who she was. A mother. And mothers don't give up, not even when the man they loved tries to erase them from the world. The forest was quiet in the way that made Ivy feel small, not just physically, but existentially. The kind of quiet that reminded you how easily the world could swallow you whole. Her arms ached from holding Elijah. Her feet were blistered. The soles of her boots were caked with mud, and she hadn't felt her fingertips in hours. Snow was beginning to fall again, soft but relentless. She had been walking for what felt like eternity, each step forward powered not by strength, but sheer refusal to collapse. "Elijah," she whispered into the curls of his head. "Just hang on. I'm going to find someone." But even her own voice felt hollow in the emptiness. Then, a sound. Not Elijah, not wind. Something else. A bark. She froze. Another bark. Closer now, followed by soft, crunching footsteps. Ivy's heart leapt between fear and hope. From between two thick trees emerged a figure. A woman, older, wrapped in a faded wool coat, holding a lantern. Beside her, a brown dog with white patches at the snout stood alert but not aggressive. The woman squinted in the dim light. "My God," she breathed, hurrying forward. "Child, what in heaven's name?" Ivy swayed on her feet. Her lips parted, but no words came, just a sob. The woman caught her before she fell, steadying her with surprising strength. "You're frozen, and that baby, Lord have mercy." The dog circled them as the woman wrapped an arm around Ivy's shoulders. "My name's Charlotte," she said quickly. "This here's Max. You're safe now, okay? We're going to get you warm." Ivy didn't have the strength to protest. Her legs moved only because Charlotte's guided them. The last thing she remembered before darkness pulled at the edges of her vision was the warmth of a cabin in the distance, its chimney breathing smoke into the sky like a promise. When she woke, she was beneath thick quilts in a room that smelled of wood smoke and lavender. The fire crackled gently beside her. A kettle hissed on the stove. The walls were lined with books and old photographs, a home lived in, not just occupied. Elijah was asleep in a basket by the hearth, swaddled in fresh blankets. Max lay beside him like a sentinel. "You're awake," came Charlotte's voice. Ivy sat up slowly. You found me." Charlotte handed her a warm mug. "You weren't exactly hidden. I was walking Max and heard the baby before anything else. Sounded like a soul begging the world to listen." Ivy took a sip. The tea was sweet and earthy, like nothing she'd ever tasted. "Thank you," she whispered, tears suddenly springing back. "I didn't know where I was. He left us." Charlotte didn't ask who, not yet. She just sat beside Ivy and reached out, placing a weathered hand over her trembling one. "You don't need to explain everything right now," she said gently. "Rest, eat, heal. That little one needs you whole." Ivy nodded, swallowing the sob threatening her throat. For the first time in days, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt found. In the days that followed, Ivy barely recognized her own life, not because of its chaos, but because of its stillness. The cabin stood like a memory untouched by time. Nestled in a clearing, it had no internet, no TV, and barely a working radio. But it had something Ivy hadn't felt in weeks: safety. Each morning, the smell of cinnamon and pine greeted her before the sunrise. Charlotte moved about the small home with practiced grace, humming old gospel hymns as she boiled oats or stoked the fire. Her hands, though worn, worked with a kind of quiet reverence, like everything she touched was sacred. Ivy was slow to move at first. Her body still ached from childbirth. Her heart ached more. She'd wake to Elijah's soft cries, shuffle to his basket, and sit with him near the hearth, where the warmth wrapped around them both like a mother's shawl. She would whisper, hum, cry, sometimes all in the same hour. Charlotte never pushed. She offered help in silences, refilling Ivy's tea, folding the blankets she forgot on the chair, leaving herbal compresses by her bedside. But on the 5th day, when Ivy finally asked, "How do you survive the kind of hurt that breaks you in half?" Charlotte simply sat beside her and replied, "You start by surviving just 5 more minutes." As the snow melted and spring dared to peek through the frost, Ivy began to find rhythm in the wilderness. She learned how to boil herbs for colic, how to mend Elijah's baby clothes with needle and thread, and how to carry firewood without dropping it twice. Her hands grew rough, her steps steadier. She no longer woke gasping from dreams of gravel roads and empty car doors. There were days she still cried, usually when no one was looking, but the tears no longer tasted of fear. They were the kind of tears that washed something clean. One afternoon, Ivy sat on the porch, Elijah nestled against her chest in a wrap Charlotte had made from old curtains. A gentle breeze stirred the chimes above, and birds chirped like tiny reminders that life kept going. "You've taken to it well," Charlotte said, stepping outside with 2 mugs of chamomile. Ivy smiled faintly. "It's peaceful here. I didn't know peace could feel so strange." Charlotte sat beside her. "That's because most of us mistake stillness for discomfort. But child, sometimes stillness is the place where healing finally catches up to you." They sat together in silence. The good kind. That night, as Ivy laid Elijah down to sleep in the handmade cradle beside her bed, she stared at his tiny face. His pale skin glowed in the moonlight. His hair had darkened slightly. His eyes, still gray-blue, followed shadows on the ceiling. "I don't know what you'll grow up thinking about where we came from," she whispered, brushing a curl from his forehead. "But I promise you this. You will never question whether you were wanted. Not by me," he gurgled in reply, and she smiled through the tears threatening to fall. Outside, the forest was quiet again. But this time the silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like a beginning. Elijah took his first steps between pine needles and sunbeams. There was no playground, no stroller rides through suburban parks, just a forest clearing, a winding dirt trail, and the soft rustle of trees that had stood longer than any man. Ivy would often watch him toddle across the mossy earth, arms out like wings, face lit with unfiltered awe. Every squirrel startled into a tree or bird swooping through the air was a miracle to him. Charlotte once chuckled, watching from the porch as Elijah crouched in fascination over an anthill. "That boy's got more curiosity than a raccoon in a henhouse." "He's always asking why," Ivy smiled, "even when I'm not sure of the answer." "That's good," Charlotte replied. "Children who ask why don't grow up to follow just because someone tells them to." By the time Elijah was 5, Ivy had turned the corner of the cabin into a makeshift classroom. The walls were decorated with hand-drawn alphabets and cut-out leaves labeled with handwritten names. Their dining table doubled as a school desk, cluttered with crayons, scavenged books, and leaves pressed between wax paper. Charlotte, though no trained teacher, became Elijah's favorite professor. She showed him how to read clouds, how to name herbs by smell, how to trace deer tracks in the mud and tell time by the slant of light through the trees. "Look here," she whispered one morning, kneeling beside him near a cluster of ferns. "This one's yarrow, heals cuts and fevers, nature's own first aid." Elijah's eyes widened. "Like magic?" Charlotte chuckled. "Better. Magic makes you believe, but knowledge makes you understand." Ivy watched her son flourish in this earthy laboratory, his notebooks filling with childlike sketches of plants and curious questions scrawled in crooked letters. Why does the moon change shape? Do trees sleep? Can people grow back after they break? That last one stopped Ivy cold when she read it. She stared at the words for a long time before adding a gentle note beneath it in her own handwriting. Yes, sometimes slower, but yes. As the years passed, Elijah's hunger for learning grew. Ivy would venture into town once a month to pick up groceries and scour used bookstores. She always came back with armfuls: encyclopedias missing covers, torn dictionaries, old high school biology books that smelled like chalk and hope. Elijah devoured them all. By 9, he could name every bone in the human body. By 10, he was asking Charlotte if the sap in trees worked like veins. By 11, he had built a makeshift stethoscope from a funnel, rubber tubing, and 2 mason jar lids. "I want to help people," he said one night at dinner, balancing a plate on one hand while quizzing Ivy about white blood cells. "Like doctors do, but different, better." "Better how?" Ivy asked. "I want to help people who don't get help, the forgotten ones, like us." Charlotte paused mid-spoonful. She looked at Ivy, then at Elijah. "You're gonna shake this world, child. I can feel it in my bones." There were days when Ivy worried he was missing something. Friends, playdates, the buzz of normalcy. But then she'd see him lying in the grass, watching the stars, whispering theories to the sky. And she knew Elijah's mind was bigger than the world could hold. He didn't need to fit into it. He needed to rebuild it. One evening, as the three of them sat on the porch sipping tea, Elijah asked, "Mama, do I look like you?" Ivy stiffened slightly. She'd known this moment would come. "You have my eyes," she said, stroking his hair. "But you're your own kind of beautiful." He nodded, thoughtful. "People stare sometimes when we go into town." Charlotte leaned forward. "That's because they're curious, and people fear what they don't understand. But their fear is not your burden." Elijah looked up, his voice small but steady. "Will I ever meet my dad?" The question hit Ivy like a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She didn't lie. She never had. "Someday," she said quietly. "And when you do, you'll know who you are, with or without him." Elijah didn't speak again, but he leaned his head against her shoulder and closed his eyes. And Ivy knew then. The world might not be fair, but Elijah was being raised in a home where truth lived. And truth, like a seed planted in good soil, would grow. The winter Elijah turned 12, Ivy caught him dissecting a dead frog behind the cabin. She had gone outside with a basket of folded laundry when she saw him crouched over a flat rock, surgical focus in his eyes and a dull kitchen knife in his hand. "Elijah!" she shouted, heart pounding. "What are you—" He looked up, unfazed. "He was already dead. I found him near the creek. I wanted to see how his heart worked." Ivy rushed over, half panicked, half horrified. "Baby, you can't just cut things open like that." "But Mom," he said, eyes bright with intensity. "Did you know a frog's heart has 3 chambers, not 4 like ours? Isn't that crazy?" He wasn't being morbid. He was being curious, deeply, uncontrollably curious. She exhaled, hand over her chest, unsure whether to scold him or hand him a lab coat. That night, she told Charlotte what she'd seen. Charlotte just sipped her tea and nodded. "He's got that fire, the good kind, the kind that doesn't just want to know, it wants to understand." Later that week, Elijah approached Ivy while she was kneading dough. "Mom," he said, rubbing flour between his fingers like it was powder for gloves. "Can I tell you something?" She wiped her hands and looked at him. "Always. I want to be a doctor." She didn't respond at first, just stared at him with eyes suddenly full. "I want to learn how to fix people," he continued. "Not just their bodies, but their hurt, the kind you can't always see." Ivy knelt, brushing the hair from his forehead. "Why?" "Because I know what it feels like to need someone, and not have them come." Her throat tightened. The memory of being left in that forest flickered behind her eyes. "Elijah," she whispered, "you'd be the kind of doctor people remember for the rest of their lives." He smiled, not a child's smile, but something deeper, anchored. "I want to make things right, for you, for me, for anyone who's ever been forgotten." From that moment on, everything changed. He studied harder, read deeper, took notes in spiral-bound journals until the spines cracked. Ivy would often wake up at midnight to find the kitchen light still on. Her son hunched over anatomy charts or sketching diagrams on napkins. She'd once wanted to become a doctor too, before life detoured her into survival. Now, watching Elijah chase the dream she'd buried, she felt something like healing. Not just for him, but for herself. It was the night before Elijah's departure. His backpack was already sitting by the door, overstuffed with notebooks, second-hand textbooks, and a pair of boots Charlotte had insisted he take, in case the city eats your feet. The scholarship had come through. His dorm was waiting. The future was calling. But Ivy hadn't slept in 3 days. She sat on the porch alone, wrapped in her mother's old shawl, staring at the stars like they might rearrange themselves into the words she couldn't find. When the screen door creaked open behind her, she didn't turn. "I know something's wrong," Elijah said gently, taking the seat beside her. "You've been quiet, even for you." Ivy sighed. The air was cool, the sky scattered with ash-colored clouds. She turned to him slowly, the boy she had carried through darkness now grown into a man full of light. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago," she began. "About your father." Elijah's brow furrowed. He leaned in, listening closely. "You've always believed he died before you could remember him," Ivy continued, voice trembling. "That was never true." Elijah blinked. What do you mean? She paused, swallowing hard. He didn't die. He left us. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. He left, Elijah repeated slowly. Ivy nodded, the words catching in her throat. The day after you were born, everything changed. You didn't look like him, not even like me. He couldn't understand it. He thought I had betrayed him. But you didn't, Elijah said instantly, his voice low but sure. You didn't. No, Ivy said, tears welling in her eyes. Never. But he didn't listen. He was consumed by doubt. And one day, he told me we needed space. He drove us deep into the woods. Said he needed to clear his head, and then... Her voice cracked. He left us there, Elijah, in the middle of nowhere. I had just given birth. I didn't even know where we were. Elijah's face had gone pale. His hands gripped the edge of the chair. Mrs. Charlotte found us, she whispered. Took us in, saved us. Everything you've known, the love, the life, the home we made. It came from her kindness, not from him. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at her, not with anger, but something deeper, something wounded. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't want you to carry his mistake, Ivy said. You were never his failure. You were my hope. I wanted you to grow up strong, without bitterness. Elijah stared out into the dark trees beyond the porch, the place that had once been a prison, now a sanctuary. Do you know where he is? No, she said softly. And truthfully, I stopped looking. Elijah nodded, absorbing the weight of it all. Then he took her hand. You didn't have to protect me from the truth, Mom. I would have loved you either way. Tears streamed down Ivy's cheeks, the kind that came not from sorrow, but from a long-awaited release. She kissed the back of his hand and whispered, I know, but I had to be sure you'd grow into the kind of man who could handle it, and you have. They sat in silence, mother and son bound not by shared bloodlines or appearances, but by survival, sacrifice, and a love that refused to break. The operating room smelled of antiseptic and intensity. Bright lights bore down on Elijah as he stood at the head of the table, gloved hands poised, masked face unreadable. To his left, a nurse read vitals aloud. To his right, a resident hovered with silent awe. The rhythm of the OR pulsed like a heartbeat, and at the center of it all, Elijah was calm. He had trained for this, dreamed of this, and now he was the one people looked to when life was hanging by a thread. Lacerated spleen, internal bleeding, pulse unstable, the attending had said as they rushed the patient in. Car accident, middle-aged male, possible prior surgeries. Get cardio on standby. Elijah hadn't even looked at the face. All that mattered was the body beneath the gown, the open wound, the failing numbers. Scalpel, clamp, suction. He moved with practiced precision. Surgical decisions made in seconds. Hours passed like minutes. Only when the bleeding was finally controlled and the team exhaled did Elijah allow himself a glance at the patient's chart. Name, Isaac Reynolds. Age, 47. Blood type, B+. History, mild hypertension, allergic to penicillin. Elijah froze. The name rang through him like a bell, distant and painful. He stepped closer. The man's face, pale, older. A jagged scar near the hairline. Was changed, but unmistakable. Isaac, his father. Elijah took 2 slow steps back, the sterile floor suddenly tilting beneath him. Doctor, the nurse said, are you all right? He nodded stiffly. Yes, I just need a moment. He stepped into the hallway, pulled off his mask, and leaned against the cool tile wall, breath shallow. It felt like the universe had played some cruel joke. Or maybe some divine design had brought them full circle. The man who had abandoned him in the woods was now lying unconscious on the table he just saved him on. Elijah had spent years imagining this moment. He'd pictured shouting, accusations, maybe even walking away when his father needed help. But instead, he had done what he was trained to do. He had saved him. Without hesitation, without revenge, without even knowing. Later that evening, as the hospital quieted and Isaac lay in post-op recovery, Elijah sat outside the room, still in his scrubs, staring through the window. He didn't feel triumph or closure. He felt weight. Charlotte once told him, "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't make you feel good. It just makes you whole." Now he understood. Isaac had been patched up with sutures and stitches, but the deeper wounds between them, those ran marrow deep. Still, Elijah knew this. He had broken the cycle. He had chosen mercy when he had every reason not to. He hadn't become his father, and that, more than anything, was the real healing. The next morning, the head surgeon pulled him aside. "You stabilized him when no one thought we could. That was some miracle work, Elijah." He simply nodded. "Just doing my job, sir." But inside, something had shifted. He hadn't just saved a man's life. He had reclaimed his own story. Isaac awoke slowly, the hospital room spinning into focus with the sterile smell of saline and distant intercoms humming in the air. His chest ached like it had been crushed under bricks, and a tight bandage wrapped around his abdomen. He blinked at the IV line in his arm, trying to piece together what had happened. "Car crash," the nurse said gently when he asked. "You're lucky to be alive. One of the surgeons said if you'd gotten here 10 minutes later, it might have been a different story." "Who was it?" Isaac murmured, dry-mouthed. "The surgeon, I mean." The nurse smiled. "Dr. Elijah Ward, one of our best." The name meant nothing to him. Not yet. Over the next few days, Elijah visited Isaac's room periodically for standard check-ins. His demeanor was cool, professional, never revealing the volcanic truth buried beneath his calm eyes. He examined the vitals, asked about pain levels, made small talk, never once hinted at who he was. Isaac, oblivious, grew fond of him. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," he said one morning, sipping hospital coffee. "You remind me of someone I once knew, or maybe should have known." Elijah smiled faintly. "Funny how life works like that sometimes." The words hung between them like smoke. On Isaac's final day in recovery, just as he was being discharged, he turned to Elijah with a hesitant expression. "I know this is probably against protocol," he said, folding his discharge papers, "but I'd like to buy you dinner." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Dinner?" "You saved my life," Isaac said simply. "That's not something I forget. I feel like I owe you something." "You don't," Elijah replied, carefully neutral. "I know, but I want to. There's a place just outside of town, great steak, decent wine, if you're free this weekend." Elijah paused. Every part of him screamed to walk away. But something deeper, something unfinished, whispered, "Not yet, not until he sees." So he nodded slowly. "I'll be there." Isaac extended a hand. "Thank you, Dr. Ward." Elijah shook it, firm, steady, eyes locked. "See you soon, Mr. Reynolds." And as Isaac left the room, unaware of the storm quietly building behind him, Elijah stood in the doorway. Not just a man with a secret, but a son preparing to let the truth speak for itself. Section 13, Dinner Twist, Grandmother Reveals Family Secret. Title, The Portrait That Changed Everything. Target word, count, approximately 800. The restaurant was quiet, low-lit, and rustic, an old converted barn nestled just off the edge of town. Candlelight flickered on wood-paneled walls, and vintage jazz played low beneath the hum of silverware and murmured conversation. Elijah arrived early. He sat at a table near the fireplace, back straight, heart steady, though inside he felt like a pendulum caught mid-swing. He had worn a dark blazer, clean-cut and calm, but his thoughts were anything but. He wasn't here for the steak. He was here for the truth. Isaac walked in just after 7, looking more rested than the last time they met. He wore a brown coat and carried the air of someone trying to act normal despite a lifetime of cracks beneath the surface. But he wasn't alone. Trailing behind him, walking with a grace that defied her cane, was an older woman with a head of silver curls, skin the color of worn parchment, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "This," Isaac said, gesturing, "is my grandmother, Amelia. She raised me. I hope it's all right I brought her. She insisted on meeting the man who brought me back from the dead." Elijah rose to greet her, masking his surprise. "Of course," "It's an honor, ma'am." Amelia took his hand in both of hers and studied his face for a long, unsettling moment. "Strong grip," she said. "Gentle eyes. That's a rare mix." Elijah chuckled softly. "I try to keep people in one piece." They sat, ordered. Small talk floated across the table. Medicine, recovery, the weather. Isaac asked about Elijah's schooling, his upbringing. "I was raised in the forest," Elijah said vaguely. "Off-grid. No distractions. Just books, a lot of quiet, and a very strong mother." Amelia smiled knowingly. "Sometimes the wild teaches better than any classroom." The meal passed smoothly until dessert, when Amelia set down her fork, folded her napkin, and leaned back with a sigh. "Isaac," she said, "do you remember the attic? The one in your father's old study?" Isaac blinked. "I haven't been in there since I was a teenager." "You should have looked closer," she said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a thin, aged photograph in a silver frame. She placed it carefully on the table between them. Elijah leaned forward. The image was black and white, slightly faded, but the man in it was unmistakable. He was young, broad-shouldered and dark-skinned. His smile was wide, his eyes full of mischief. And standing beside him was Amelia. Younger, softer. Her hand slipped into his. "Who is he?" Isaac asked. Amelia exhaled. "His name was James. He was my first love, my secret, your grandfather." Isaac's face twisted in disbelief. "What are you talking about? Grandpa Martin was who I married?" "But James," she tapped the photo gently. "James was who I loved. Your father, my son, was biracial, Isaac. That blood, his, runs through you." The table went silent. Isaac stared at the photo like it had betrayed him. Elijah's heart thudded in his chest. "You're telling me," Isaac whispered, "that I'm part black?" "Yes," Amelia said. "And you always have been." Isaac looked like the ground had shifted beneath him. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the photo, studying every crease, every detail. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "I was scared," Amelia said softly. "Back then, this kind of truth destroyed families, cost jobs, lives. And then your father came, and I let the lie live because it seemed easier, but it wasn't. It poisoned everything." Elijah felt his chest tighten. So many questions, so many years of pain. And all of it, because of a lie buried in silence. Isaac turned to Elijah, as if seeing him for the first time. "My son could have looked like him," he whispered. "That's what this means, doesn't it?" Elijah nodded slowly, the words resting on the edge of his tongue. "Maybe he did," he said carefully. Isaac blinked. "What?" Before Elijah could answer, Amelia's eyes locked on him. Her gaze narrowed, sharp and studying. "You remind me of James," she said slowly. "And your voice. I know I've never met you before, but there's something in you I recognize." Elijah swallowed hard. He could feel the truth rising in his chest, uncontainable, electric. But this wasn't the moment to explode it. Not yet. So he said only, "Maybe blood carries echoes." And Amelia, wise enough to leave silence where answers hadn't been spoken, nodded once, knowingly. As they left the restaurant that night, Isaac paused at the door, still gripping the photo like it was the only real thing left in his life. He looked at Elijah, his voice hollow. "I've spent my whole life trying to be something, and maybe I was never who I thought I was to begin with." Elijah held his gaze. "Sometimes the truth doesn't change who we are, it just explains us." Isaac stood frozen in the doorway of his apartment. The photo of James still rested on his kitchen counter, its corners curled slightly with age, but its truth as sharp as ever. All night he'd stared at it, replaying Amelia's voice in his head. "James was your grandfather. Your father was mixed, so are you." He had always believed he understood himself, where he came from, who he was. But now his foundation felt fractured, and the cracks were starting to widen. That evening, a knock came at the door. He opened it to find Elijah standing there, casual, composed, but carrying something in his eyes that Isaac hadn't noticed before. "Come in," Isaac said hoarsely, stepping aside. Elijah entered silently, his hands in his coat pockets, gaze scanning the room before landing on the photo. "You've been thinking," he said. "I haven't stopped," Isaac admitted. He walked to the counter, picked up the picture, and stared at it again. "My whole life," he murmured, "I was taught to be proud, but also taught to be careful, to avoid shame, to stay within the lines. My father always talked about legacy, bloodlines, what people see when they look at you. Now I realize he was hiding the very thing he feared." Elijah nodded. "And in doing so, passed that fear down to you?" Isaac looked at him, eyes searching. "I keep thinking back to my son, the one I—" He choked on the words. "The one I left," Elijah finished for him. Isaac flinched. "Yes." There was a long pause. Isaac's hands trembled as he set the photo down. "You were right that night," he whispered. "At the hospital, when you said blood doesn't always show up the way we expect." Elijah took a slow breath, then stepped forward. "It wasn't just a metaphor," he said softly. "I didn't come into your life by coincidence, Isaac." Isaac's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" Elijah pulled a folded photograph from his coat pocket. Carefully, he laid it on the table beside James's portrait. It was an old hospital photo, a black woman with tear-stained cheeks cradling a pale newborn in her arms. Behind her stood a man, blurred mid-motion as he walked out of the room. Isaac's face paled. His hand shook as he reached for the image. "No," he breathed. "That's not—" "Yes," Elijah said quietly. "That's you. That's me. And the woman you left in the woods. That was my mother." Isaac stumbled back, eyes wide, the breath stolen from his lungs. "No, no," he gasped. "That can't— I didn't know. You—" "I'm your son, Isaac." The words landed like thunder. Isaac's knees buckled. He sank into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands. "I left you," he whispered. "I left you to die." "You left us because you were afraid," Elijah said, his voice calm but unsparing. "Afraid of a truth you couldn't explain, a truth that was inside you all along." Isaac shook his head violently. "I thought she lied. I thought— God, I was so certain." "But certainty isn't truth," Elijah said, "and doubt isn't an excuse." Isaac broke then. He wept, not quietly, not with dignity, but with the guttural sound of a man unraveling. Years of pride, fear, shame, and silence poured out in waves. His hands trembled, his body rocked. Elijah stood still, watching, not with hatred, not even with vengeance, but with the silent ache of a child who had waited his whole life for the pain to be acknowledged. "I'm sorry," Isaac gasped. "I'm so sorry." Elijah didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to the table, picked up the photograph of his mother holding him, and stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked back at Isaac. "I didn't come for your apology," he said. "I came because I needed to see if the man who left us could recognize what he lost." Isaac's tear-streaked face lifted, pleading. "And did he?" Elijah nodded once, quietly. "Yes, but I also saw a man who still has something left to fix." Then he turned toward the door, paused, and added, "My mother doesn't need you to make it right. She already did that herself." And with that, he walked away, leaving Isaac with the photo, the truth, and the echo of everything he never said when it mattered. It happened 3 days later. Elijah was midway through his hospital rounds when the page came through. "Code Blue, room 406, female, late 70s, cardiac arrest, immediate response." His heart skipped. Room 406 was Amelia Reynolds. By the time Elijah arrived, the hallway outside the room buzzed with urgency. A crash cart was already in place, and a nurse had begun chest compressions. Amelia lay motionless, her face pale, lips tinged blue. "Clear!" someone shouted as the defibrillator charged. A jolt rippled through her body. No rhythm. Another shock. Still nothing. Elijah pushed forward. "I'm taking over." He knelt beside the bed, his hands moving with a precision that felt more personal than clinical. He wasn't just saving a patient. He was saving the woman who had, without knowing, unearthed the buried truth of who he was. "Amelia, stay with me," he murmured as he administered another shock. You don't get to leave yet. Not like this. Her pulse flickered, then steadied. A faint beep echoed from the monitor. A heartbeat. The room exhaled. A nurse clapped Elijah on the back. She's back. Elijah leaned over her fragile frame, brushing damp curls from her forehead. Her breathing was shallow but present. You're tougher than you look, he whispered. Amelia didn't open her eyes, but a faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Hours later, after she'd been stabilized, Elijah sat beside her bedside, chart in hand, pretending to be just another doctor. But Amelia, eyes barely open, turned to him and murmured, I know now. Elijah looked up. Know what? You're not just anyone. I felt it the night we had dinner, but now I'm sure. She reached for his hand, her fingers paper-thin but warm. You have James's eyes, she whispered, and his heart. Elijah swallowed hard. I'm sorry for how long the truth was hidden, she said. You didn't deserve the silence, but I'm glad it was you. I'm glad it was your hands that pulled me back. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them away. Thank you, he said softly. For everything. She squeezed his hand, her voice barely audible. Don't carry the weight he couldn't. You're already more than he ever became. Elijah sat there long after she fell asleep, her heartbeat steady on the monitor beside him. In that moment, he didn't feel like a surgeon. He felt like a grandson, and that meant more than any title on his badge. The knock came just after sunset. Ivy had been in the garden, kneeling in the dirt beside the tomato vines, her fingers stained with soil and her breath wrapped in the scent of summer. She wasn't expecting anyone. Charlotte was napping inside, and Elijah was still at the hospital. When she opened the cabin door, her breath caught. Isaac stood there, older, paler, but undeniably him. She stared at him for a long moment, emotion crawling up her spine like an old ghost. Her hand gripped the edge of the door, not from fear, but from restraint. Ivy, he said softly. Her name sounded foreign coming from him. I know I shouldn't be here, he continued, but I had to see you. She didn't speak. Her eyes narrowed, taking in the man who had once promised forever and then walked her into silence. I met him, he said. Elijah, I didn't know. God, Ivy, I didn't know. She crossed her arms, leaning against the frame. But you suspected. That was enough for you. I was wrong, he said quickly. So wrong. And nothing I say can undo what I did. No, she replied, voice flat. It can't. He shifted on his feet, eyes pleading. I just wanted to tell you, I'm sorry. I carry it, every single day now. I see him, strong, kind, brilliant, and I know I had nothing to do with that. I gave up the best part of my life, and I see that now. You didn't just give up, Ivy said, finally stepping outside. You discarded. You left a newborn and a bleeding woman in the middle of nowhere. You let doubt kill love, and you let pride bury truth. Her words hit him like rain on a wildfire, sudden, extinguishing. I wasn't strong, he admitted. I wasn't ready to face what I didn't understand. And now? She asked, arms still folded, voice steady. I'm trying, he said. I want a chance to know him, to know you again, even if it's from a distance. Ivy shook her head gently. You don't get to want that now, she said. Elijah grew up whole, not because of you, but in spite of you. Charlotte and I, we gave him roots. He gave himself wings. She paused, voice softening, but only slightly. I'm glad he saved your life. That's who he is, but don't mistake his mercy for an open door. Isaac's eyes filled, his throat visibly working. You hate me. I don't, she said. I don't have room for hate, only for peace. And peace means letting go. He nodded slowly, pain etched into every wrinkle. I'll go, he whispered. She stepped back toward the porch, holding the door half open. For what it's worth, she said, I hope you find a way to live with the truth. It's lighter than living with a lie. As he walked down the dirt path, head bowed, Ivy closed the door behind him. Not with anger, not with relief, but with a quiet, final grace. Some endings don't need slamming doors. They just need silence. The world was quiet again. Not the painful kind of quiet, not the suffocating stillness of heartbreak or absence. This was different. This was the hush that settles just before something beautiful begins. Ivy stood in the doorway of the hospital room, hands gently clasped, watching as her son cradled his newborn daughter. Elijah sat beside the bed, a tiny bundle in his arms wrapped in pink, her face barely the size of his palm. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, catching the curve of his jaw, the slope of his shoulder. He looked peaceful, awestruck, transformed. Ivy wiped a quiet tear from her cheek. He hadn't seen her yet. She wanted to give him this moment. He whispered something to the baby, a promise maybe, or a prayer. Ivy couldn't hear the words, but she felt them. Love had a way of moving without sound. Charlotte arrived an hour later, escorted in her wheelchair by a nurse with soft eyes and a soft voice. Amelia had passed peacefully weeks earlier, and though her absence was felt like a shadow stretching across the edges of joy, today belonged to new beginnings. "She's here?" Charlotte asked. Ivy nodded. "Healthy, loud lungs, strong grip, just like her father." They entered the room together. Elijah looked up, smiling. "She's been waiting on you both." Charlotte chuckled, eyes sparkling as she leaned forward. "Well, I hope she's patient. That's not one of my better traits." Elijah turned the baby gently in his arms, revealing her face. Charlotte gasped softly. Oh, she's perfect." "She's so tiny," Ivy whispered, brushing a finger along her granddaughter's cheek. "But she carries so much already." Elijah looked up. "I named her Grace." Charlotte blinked. "Grace?" He nodded. "Because that's what saved us, all of us, even when we didn't deserve it." Ivy's breath caught. She remembered the first time she held Elijah, alone, exhausted, unsure. She had whispered promises through cracked lips and trembling hands. She had no idea how she'd keep them, only that she would die trying. And now, that same child held life in his hands, not with fear, but with purpose. Later that afternoon, as visitors dwindled and the room grew still, Elijah sat beside the window with Grace curled against his chest. Ivy watched him from the edge of the bed. "She has your eyes," she said softly. "She has your fire," Elijah replied. There was a long, warm silence. Then he said, "I've thought a lot about what kind of father I want to be." Ivy waited. "I don't want to be perfect," he continued. "I just want her to never question if she's enough." "She won't," Ivy said, "because you already know what it feels like to be doubted, to be left." He nodded. "I'll never let that happen to her. I'll be there for every first step, every scraped knee, every question she's afraid to ask." "You already are," Ivy whispered. That night, after everyone had left, Elijah stood alone with Grace in his arms. He stepped onto the hospital's rooftop, where the city stretched out like a galaxy in motion, lights blinking, horns echoing faintly below. He looked up at the sky. "Your grandfather never knew me," he said quietly to the bundle in his arms. "But I know who I am, because your grandmother never let me forget, because the woman who raised her, Charlotte, showed me how strength can be soft, and because somewhere along the way, I decided I'd rather build than break." Grace stirred softly, yawning. Elijah smiled. "You'll grow up with stories," he said. "Some painful, some powerful, but you'll never carry the weight of silence." He kissed her forehead. "You are the next beginning, and I will be your roots." And as the wind swept gently across the rooftop, father and daughter stood together beneath the stars, not as a symbol of what was lost, but as a promise of all that would be found.